Jerry Haas, actually, years ago, we were qualifying for the Open back in St. Louis. He said, "You're hitting down on the putt, right?" And I'm not sure, am I?
Yeah, Jay Haas's brother now, the
Jay
coach of
Haas's
Wake
brother.
Forest.
And
right.
so it's interesting, as I've learned, I think all that means is my shaft has a tiny bit of forward lean at impact.
Show us.
And that actually helps have the ball be compressed different. I know another good friend of mine, Rob Akins, and I spend a lot of time together. He helped me understand that as long as the grip's leading, the head has a chance to keep accelerating.
Right.
I see so many players now break down before impact, the head's pass, that means the head is decelerating. And so my sensation of hitting down on the ball really allows me to hit through the ball, accelerate through the ball, and it's almost like a trap or a cover at impact.
Now, when you do that, all of the high-tech stuff out there that they use to design putters to determine how much loft you have on it, is that ball actually, you think, pinching it into the ground like an iron shot? Or is it just a matter of having enough loft to keep it accelerating?
I play 5.5 degrees of loft on my putter.
Wow.
So that means that I can afford to have a 1 degree forward lean or almost a 2 degree forward lean and still be at 3.5, 4 degrees of loft, which is kind of basically what everybody's come up with is about right at impact.
Right. What I'm
read greens and how do I control my speed? The answer really for me is we learn how to hit putts solid consistently. Once we have a motion that lets us strike the ball pretty much in the sweet spot, catching the ball solidly, I think then our instincts take over. When we don't have that consistency, we're striking the ball on the bottom, a little on the heel. I say our body doesn't know what gear to put it in.
Yeah.
So it kind of puts it in a high gear so that we're not always short. So the one that goes way by is usually the one that we hit solid. So if we can learn a technique that hits it solid, and for someone who's out there catching onto this, or maybe they can go see their pro, but their objective is to start hitting their putts solid, then their instincts will take over, their distance control will get a lot better.
When you talk about putting, your stroke, the way you putt, the way you like to teach, is not a long, flowing, pendulum-style stroke in any manner. You like to hit the ball.
It has a direct blow to the ball. I enjoyed getting to spend a little bit of time with Steve Elkington earlier this year. He said, I am a certified golf machine instructor, so he's gone through the process of learning that technique in depth.
Wow. He
said, if you put a definition or a terminology on what you're teaching a hit. And I said, thank you, that's what we'll call it. So it is a hit. Keith Clearwater's a guy who kind of pointed out I'm not alone. Ben Crenshaw struck the ball, had a very short follow through. I think Mr. Faxon does that quite a bit. There's a number of guys along the way that, their stroke had them accelerating through the ball, but the stroke ended pretty soon. And I think when I explain that, it doesn't happen on purpose. It's a reaction to what's going on. I've talked about the shoulders moving around in the stroke. What happens is my right shoulder, when it finishes its stroke, my stroke ends as soon as my right elbow gets long, because I'm not moving my shoulders a lot and I'm not breaking my wrist down. So my elbows hinge in my stroke slightly. As soon as my right elbow lengthens, that's the end of the stroke. And that's what would cause it to come to the end. It's interesting that oftentimes in my clinics I tell a little story about my friend Dr. Gaines back home that I had a hard time getting him to turn his shoulders. And he came back with me, he said, your shoulders don't turn. Well, I was stumped. Well, what he explained to me is he said, your thoracic spine rotates. He's an orthopedic surgeon. That really means that our spine is what is rotating and letting our motion go around a single axis. And so that in and of itself keeps us very quiet.
That's interesting stuff. We're going to get
It's fun to watch because he's got the same routine every time. It's, it doesn't waver. Every time he hits the ball, it's the same routine, whether it's chipping, whether it's putting, whether it's his full swing. And when he actually gets up to hit, you can see just such focus. And, that's, I think, a big difference. Us little hackers, we tend to get distracted easily, and it's hard to focus as well.
My putting, certain things I try and do all the time. Every putt, ball position is important to me, so I measure with my putter, and I put the ball down. I'm putting towards this reflector. Put the putter down, and I know that my foot needs to be, it's about 2 putter heads to the inside of my toe right here. And the ball needs to be about here in my stance. That way I catch it just on the upslope, upswing. So ball position has to be consistent, and my aim has to be consistent. So before I ever get here, I line my putt up back here and I pick out a spot somewhere in here. It could be a 30-foot putt. I'm still aiming at a spot here. And if I can do those 2 things consistently, then green reading is the next thing, and then I don't worry about my stroke. I think too many people, they miss a putt and they think it's a stroke. And they probably didn't aim properly or read enough break. So people want to change their stroke first instead of changing the easy part, which is aiming and green reading.
Beauty.
There it is. I see guys at the top of the professional world whose head movement's very quick. And I thought, you know, for me, I kind of want to see, we talked about visualizing a shot. Well, I think you do the same visualizing a putt. And when I'm putting well, it's almost like somebody's taken out a chalk line and showed me that line. I look up twice. You know, look up first to get my general distance. And the second to make sure that my alignment is correct. And again, that reinforces that distance. Because you can have distance right and alignment wrong. You have alignment wrong, so it only takes 2 things, distance and direction, but that's the hard part. But I'm always trying to see that line from ball to cup. And because again, the last thing up here is the first thing out there.
I work a lot on my tempo, my stroke. I think I miss a lot of putts by rushing my tempo. So another uphill putt. Got to really work on the speed. I like it inside left.
I like to see things match. I like to hit a lot of one-handed putts because if you don't follow through, the ball's going to go right or left every time. So I love to practice one-handed because the good thing about it is you always follow through because the putter's so heavy.
When I putt, normally on a normal day, a normal tournament, I try to have very loose hands. I'm visualizing, I'm not very focused on my stroke at all. I'm only focused on, not even focused a lot on speed, except for when I'm reading my putt. And by reading my putt, that dictates my speed, which line I pick. So once I get up here, now I'm just concentrating on my line and the field that I've picked out for that line, and go ahead and let it run.
The thing that gets overlooked in putting so much is the speed of your putts. Because if I hit this putt easy or firm, the speed's going to change. So I read my putt with speed in mind. And I'm not going to 3-putt a lot if my speed's good.
This, you know, I'm looking at a spot, you know, about 3 feet out, you know, the Dave Stockton approach. And he's one of the best putters I ever saw. And, you know, to me, this putt looks like it's going to go maybe just wiggle a little to the right. So once I've established where I want the ball to go, then the mind's off as far as, you know, do I need to hit this hard? Do I have the right line? Do I not have the right line? There's no doubt in my brain once I figured out, okay, this is where I want it to go. And then the minute you hit the ball, there's nothing else you can control. It's all up to where it ends up going. You've already done your job. So that's the way my approach is to kind of putting. So I think this putt here is, you know, going to maybe just wiggle a little right. So I've already made up my mind what I want to do. And when I get over it, I like to look at the hole and kind of take 2 practice putts, and then look at the ball, put my left hand here, and when I put my hand back on the putter, that's when I take the putter back. And I don't think about, do I need to take the putter outside or inside, or I don't think about any of that. So that's basically how I approach getting over putts. And I think that way you take all the doubt, you take all that out of your brain.
First third, the ball's going the fastest, so the break doesn't really affect it. Second third, it starts to affect it. Now the last third I'm really interested in because that's where the putt's going to turn the most. So I'm kind of watching exactly what I'm doing here, but I'm interested in this last third the most. But I am coming to the low side. And the reason I was asking you that is because I felt like you would circle the thing. You'd go and if somebody makes a mistake, if you look at it on both sides, high side, low side, on a putt that breaks 10 inches, you're going to mess yourself up because it's going to look totally different.
But it just goes to show you, when you don't care, it's not a problem.
Well, it's like Lee Trevino said, you know, one time. He said, "It's the way he putted fast. You don't worry about it. You don't have anything to worry about. The pressure's gone. The longer you sit over a putt and worry about it, oh, I got to make this. This could be 100,000, or, you know, you got your amateurs playing $1 a game, and they're over it for, you know, for a long time. All they're doing is thinking about how they can miss it. Right. You know, so I like the thought of how I'm going to make it than sit there and say how I'm going to miss it.
I did this when I was young, and I still try and do it. On a putt this length, I try and never see go in. Never. I mean, if I've got a putt like this, I know if it goes in because I got a saying, listen, don't look. So if I hold this, I know whether it goes in, and I know if I miss without even looking. So there's my eye on that ball. I know that's in because I heard it. That will save golfers so many strokes, but you know what? They can't do it.
Okay, before I even hit a putt, I can tell most people that when I putt, I like to make it instinctive, reactive. You know, your first look is always the look that you want to believe in. You know, that the first instinct to me, trusting that and going with it. And I think anybody that's played well has ever made putts. Every once in a while you get that feeling you're going to make the putt before you hit it. And you'd like to get in that state of mind every time, wouldn't you? And I like to, once I look back to the ball, start my stroke right away. I don't like to sit there and wait and think about, you know, the checklist of things that people think about. I just like to look, I know where my target is, come back to the ball, and then I go. And that's worked for me. And, you know, we talked about in the first session here, when Rocco Mide made that putt at Greensboro on Sunday, he had a putt this length. I bet you he's never felt more confident over a putt in his life. It didn't matter, and he made it. And to me, that's the biggest key. And when you're putting well or playing well, you know, you see the target, you hit it there, and it goes there. And when you're in that great mindset, even if you miss, you accept that miss so much better. And that's why I think I've been a good player and a good putter over a long period of time is, you know, that ability to forget your mistakes is so important.
Between me and the hole, because it's so critical, no matter how your stroke is, to actually get the ball started off on line. And so I always just try to roll it over that spot that's maybe 6 inches to 12 inches away.
I still make sure that I play the ball in the hole. I see a lot of people who have a very bad habit of missing short putts because they play too much break. And so for me, it's a matter of aiming the ball in the hole and making sure that I hit the putt firm enough to get it in, and not go through a whole lot of exercise, because the longer you stand over it, the tighter you're going to get, and then the more likely you are to make a mistake.
I learned a long time ago, try to pick out something a whole lot smaller than the hole. Try to pick out a piece of grass or something in the back of the cup, but you got to change your focus from the whole hole to the smallest thing possible, and that seems to work for me, and I think that's what
you guys make 99.1% of yours. How does the guy at home make those 3-footers on a more consistent basis?
I think there's two things that they have to do. Number one, you've got to line the putter up right. And number two, you got to stay very still. And then you can do just about anything in your stroke and probably make the putt. I spend at least 50% on the short game, and if my swing is working well, I'll spend 100% on the short game. I'm always working on the short game. I'm not always working on my swing. And you know, your scoring clubs are inside 150 yards, and you ought to be very proficient at everything inside of 100 yards anyway, and that's what I try to be.
Try to do on reading putts. I guess actually I'll go back to Ben Crenshaw. Gave me a great tip at Augusta, probably 12 years ago or 15 years ago when I first played there, and he said to make sure that you make your mistakes on the high side, meaning, you know, right to left putt. If I'm going to misread the putt or make a mistake, he's talking about when the ball's rolling. Play too much break opposed to playing too little break. And one of the reasons he would say that is you can be a little more aggressive on a higher line. You start a little more up the slope. And if you've misread a putt, especially just like this one right here, if I read, let's say, a foot not enough break or 2 feet not enough break, hit it a little too hard, all of a sudden I've got the thing kind of racing down the slope, and that's when you see the one run 6, 8 feet by. So a lot of times it's not just because the guy's, you know, the putter went off in his hands. He might have misread it and he pulled it a little bit, and next thing you know, the thing's racing down the hill. So great example. And one of the things I'll do is I'll try to look and see what is obviously not enough break. And in this case, you know, a couple of feet's not even close. You can just kind of picture it running. If you played it, you know, a couple of feet out, you can see that thing's going to end up 10 feet below the hole. So I'll start looking up till I can find the highest place that I want to start the ball. And I do sort of spot putt. I'll kind of look, I'll try to find something to get the ball to roll past.
If I wasn't in Arizona, I'd say this is a dead straight putt, but I think because of the valley effect, it might want to go that way. But again, I mean, I'll decide that when I stand over the ball, because whenever I find myself struggling with a line, trying to really bust to try to kind of really get a clue, it ends up being a straight putt, which makes sense. You know, you really don't know which way you want it to go, and it ends up being a straight putt. This, to me, has got that look to it. So we'll see how we go. I mean, aiming on the straight putt is very hard. I guess it sounds silly, but you get less margin for error on a straight putt. It has to be straight. You know. But it worked out. So Brad Faxon, the best putter out on tour, I mean, basically he says he doesn't care if he makes it, or he strokes it like he doesn't care if he makes it or misses it. You know, I think that's the best way to pre-accept a miss or a make before you hit the putt. Makes it a lot easier to hit the putt. You know, I mean, if you're all stressed about making it, or am I going to make it, or am I going to miss it? I mean, that's something that doesn't need to be thought about when you're putting. You know, so he's obviously probably the best putter over the last 20 years. He's got the best attitude about it. I try to do that sort of stuff.
See, I went last year through a couple of phases where I putted really well, comparatively speaking, compared to, you know, how I'd putted early on in the year. And there were two things I worked really hard on. One was making sure that I had a metronomish type pace to my stroke, because I have a tendency, as with my long swing, to get a little snappy and a little quick back from the ball. So what I try to do is to try and make sure that I just lift the putter off the ground a little bit. So instead of soling the putter and then lifting it off jerkily, you just try and just lift the putter gently off the bottom, off the green, and that way you feel the weight of it better, and that allows you to have a smoother stroke back. So I worked on that a lot the tail end of 2000 and the beginning of last year. And then I got the old, I wanted to look and see where the ball was going. And what was happening was that my right hip, as I putted, was coming up and forcing, because my head was coming up, I was moving my whole side. So I tried toward the end of last year to keep my hips and my knees very, very still through the putting stroke. Now, obviously, when you get onto a long putt, there's going to be a little bit of movement there. It's very hard to stand static. But from like 20 feet in, you really don't need to use your arms or your legs and your hips at all. So